Welcome back. Today we're going to be talking about a little bit more about the heart. We've just got 3 assessment statements that we need to discuss. The first is 6.2.6, which asks us to state that the blood is composed of plasma, erythrocytes, leukocytes, and platelets. So first of all, plasma, it is the main transporting part of the blood, and it makes up about 55% of the total blood volume. It's mostly made of water, and so it takes advantage of the dissolving properties or solvent properties of water. And things that can be transported in the plasma are salts, gases, proteins, nutrients, and waste. So plasma, like I said, is the main mode of transport for items in the blood. Next we've got erythrocytes. Erythrocytes, another term for them is red blood cells. They are bioconcave discs. You can kind of see them in this image down here. So that is a red blood cell. They're quite small and they actually lack a nucleus, and because of that they're not able to reproduce on their own, and like we've talked about before, they are produced by the stem cells in the bone marrow. The purpose of red blood cells or erythrocytes is to transport oxygen throughout the body. They contain a protein called hemoglobin, which will selectively bind to oxygen, and then the red blood cells are able to transport it around. Next, we've got leukocytes, or white blood cells. We can categorize them into 2 categories for now. When we get to immunity, we'll talk more about the specifics. But we've got phagocytes, which are bacteria engulfing cells. These cells basically use endocytosis in order to engulf and destroy bacteria. And so they take in the bacteria and then bond the vesicle that the bacteria is engulfed in with a lysosome and digest the bacteria. The second type are lymphocytes, and these are the antibody producing cells of the immune system, and they kind of choreograph the whole immune response. They're mainly produced in the thymus gland, and their job is to produce antibodies, like I said. They will also detect and disable any known viruses that enter the body with these antibodies that they produce. And lastly, we've got platelets. Platelets are tiny fragments in the blood that aid in clotting. Specifically, they're usually fragments of bone marrow cells. They do not contain a nucleus, and they will act as a growth factor in wound healing. So they're going to stimulate cell growth and healing whenever there's a wound. The next assessment statement asks us to state that the following are transported by the blood: nutrients, oxygen, carbon dioxide, hormones, antibodies, urea, and heat. So nutrients, like we talked about, they're picked up mostly in the ileum of the small intestine, and they are transported by the blood plasma. So they're going to diffuse into the blood and be transported by that flow of plasma. Oxygen, like I mentioned earlier, is transported by the hemoglobin of red blood cells, so it will specifically bind to this protein, and then red blood cells are able to transport it. Carbon dioxide is transported in a few different ways. Remember, carbon dioxide is a form of respiratory waste. So it can also be transported by hemoglobin. It can also be converted into hydrogen carbonate and transported that way, or it can dissolve in blood plasma as a gas and be transported that way. The most common form of transport for carbon dioxide is for it to be converted to hydrogen carbonate ions. Next, we've got hormones. So hormones are transported in the blood. Hormones are released from several different areas throughout the body, which we'll talk about later, and they're transported in the blood plasma. Antibodies produced by white blood cells are also transported in the blood plasma, and they will go to the site of infection or go throughout the body to disable intruders. Urea is a form of waste. It is basically excretory waste carried from the liver to the kidneys to be exported by the plasma. So it's produced in the liver and needs to be carried to the kidneys to be exported, and plasma accomplishes this goal. Urea is highly soluble, and it actually is odorless, but when it's combined with water, which it is in the urine, it has a very strong odor, which gives urine its odor. And then lastly, heat is transported by the blood. Remember that heat can be dangerous if it builds up too much in a large organism. And so in this case, all parts of the blood are responsible for carrying heat. So heat is going to be absorbed by the plasma, the cells, the platelets, etc. And then as the blood reaches the extremities of the body, heat can be released to the environment. All right, our last assessment statement for the day actually comes to us from topic 11, which is our topic about immunity, but it seems like an appropriate time to discuss it while we're talking about blood. So it asks us to describe the process of blood clotting. So the purpose of clotting is to prevent massive blood loss from any damaged blood vessels. It can also be called coagulation, and clotting involves both cells and proteins. Okay, so we're going to go through the process of clotting. So for someone who is healthy, there's a disease called hemophilia, which interferes with clotting. But for someone without hemophilia, clotting begins almost instantly after an injury. So after the blood vessel is ruptured, clotting is going to begin immediately. And the thing that triggers it is exposure of the blood to other body tissues. Okay, so when blood comes in contact with something that it normally wouldn't, it's going to initiate a change in the blood platelets and the proteins that are carried by the plasma. Okay, so that change is indicated by letter A here, which is a release of clotting factors. Okay, so when the injury occurs, clotting factors are going to be released into the blood. They are going to signal an inactive enzyme called prothrombin to be converted to an active enzyme called thrombin. Okay, so that is the first change that happens because of this injury. Prothrombin is converted to thrombin, and thrombin is an active enzyme. This enzyme is required for a substance called fibrinogen to be converted to fibrin. So thrombin is the enzyme that allows fibrinogen to convert to fibrin. Now, fibrinogen has been a soluble protein in the plasma until now. So it's just been hanging out in the plasma waiting to be converted. Once thrombin acts on fibrinogen, it is converted to fibrin, which is a fibrous protein. This fibrous protein almost acts as a net, and it will trap platelets, red blood cells, all of these things, and it will hold this clump or this clot against the injury to block the loss of blood. This is a fairly complicated process with a lot of new vocabulary, so my recommendation would be that you listen to this maybe more than once. Also, at the end of the video, I will put the address to a good video about blood clotting. We'll also watch that video in class. Have a great day.